Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. The sun came up. The ground wasn't completely frozen over. And yes, there is going to be a Republican who's going to vote for Katenji Brown Jackson and confirm her as a Supreme Court justice. Can you believe it? Oh, the earth still spinning. Everything didn't come to a screeching halt. Humanity as we know it didn't end. Humanity didn't come to a screeching halt. I know. I'm expecting there to be 3, maybe 5, as many as 5 Republicans that will have the courage to step forward and say, you know what? Our job is not to pick someone who's perfectly in line with our views. Our job is to advise and consent to put someone on the court who, well, is qualified. Now, I mean, we look at the last guy who put people on the court who the American Bar Association said clearly not qualified. A huge difference. And this is where they should be doing their job a little bit better. This all, I think, but assures that Katenji Brown Jackson will be the first black woman on the Supreme Court. And while that is historic, she's also a very qualified jurist. So going forward, the court will remain a 6-3 radical right, radical corporatist court. So rest assured, crazy people, the court is still rigged on the side of the moneyed interest and the radical fringe. So happy about that. I guess. Unless something happens with Clarence Thomas, which there's still a push. There's still somebody out there talking about an impeachment inquiry, which I'm actually behind. I'm actually behind moving forward in an impeachment inquiry into Clarence Thomas, not because I think it's possible you're going to win, but because I think the information that the American people need has to be presented. I think there needs to be an awakening. I think there needs to be a moment where you're presenting what's going on. Need to do it in a factual way. Need to bring evidence to the American people, because I think a lot of the stuff that goes on behind closed doors, especially in the secretive court, I think people will be shocked by. And while Ginny Thomas and the shenanigans that have gone on around her positions in the conservative movement have largely gone unchecked over the years, there have been reports. There have been lots of stories out there. And this is one of those moments where, you know, maybe it's something to look into. Now, the former guy had a hole-in-one. Actually had a hole-in-one. And I love the fact that they put out a statement bragging about the hole-in-one. And look, you know, people who have had hole-in-ones, you know, they do brag about it. Now, I have had one once by accident. Tell the story. My father-in-law, who has since passed, whenever he would come to town, we would go golfing together because I know he was a big golfing fan. He would take me out and he would beat the tar out of me because I am a terrible golfer. I am happy if I just find the ball. And on this particular hole, now he's been golfing his entire life. He never had a hole-in-one. On this particular hole, I hit the ball. I lost it. Not unusual for me. We're searching around and he's on the green and he says, I found your ball. I go, yeah, where is he? He goes, it's in the cup. Oh, great. You know, so I put the ball in my pocket and he fumed the rest of the day. And oddly enough, we never played again. And that was the last time I've played golf. So, yeah, that was my hole-in-one story. I didn't put out a press release. I didn't put my name in the newspaper. I didn't even keep the ball, to be honest with you. I don't even have the ball. Do you still have the tee? Okay, look at that. My wife kept the tee. Look how wonderful she is. But here's the thing, and I say the reason I bring this up is the former guy put out a statement saying about the hole-in-one because he was playing with pro golfers, He said, I won't tell you who won because I'm a very modest individual. Now, here's the thing. If you're a modest individual, do you put the press release out? I had to throw that out from the beginning because there's nobody, literally nobody, even the most ardent Trump advocate, even the most MAGA hat wearing, mouth breathing, Trump rally going, paint their car red kind of Trump supporter would say that he's modest. There's nobody, literally nobody, who would say that except him. So there is that. Now he is asking for Vlad to dig up the dirt on Hunter Biden, and you go, really, no depths of depravity, none whatsoever. And the Russian TV folks, they're picking up on this. The Russian TV folks have actually, I guess, called Trump a partner. You go, hold on, walk this back. What? A Russian TV host called for regime change here in the U.S. because, Biden, and look, I think I don't think he meant to call for regime change when he said, that, you can't have someone like that leading a country. And I think he did a good job of not walking it back. Good for him. Stuck with it. But now you've got this Russian TV channel who's going, hey, regime change in the U.S. We want Trump back. We want the other guy reinstated. And that had to make Trump just smile. Even though it is one of our biggest adversaries, because he doesn't care. And I guess you could argue that's one of the great things about him. He doesn't get tied up in our old adversaries. He doesn't care who our enemies are. He doesn't care who the U.S. has got problems with. Doesn't care who's eating our lunch as long as it's good for him. And this is another one of those moments. This is most certainly one of those moments where it's really good for him. So I guess the only thing I can say is, well, good for him. And I'm hoping, and I have to say this, I'm hoping that my Republican friends are paying attention to this. And I'm hoping that at some point it gets to be where, enough. That you go, how did we go from, Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall and, to, Vladimir Putin, who's attacking and murdering people in Ukraine over what is now a debunked argument, the denazification of Ukraine, which is no longer even an argument that they're making to end the war. Not even on the table anymore. How we went to, he's a genius. He's a smart guy. And that genius thing, that's not even working out so well, because for most of us, looking at how bad Russia has done, the superpower that we thought they were, wow. In a million years, would have never thought they would have failed this miserably. Would have never thought that they would have tripped over they would have tripped. It just is what it is. Some interesting news today, though. The FEC, the Federal Elections Commission's filings. They've come out and said the National Republican Congressional Committee, the NRCC, they have spent more than $75,000 buying a particular book, either written or ghostwritten, and I'm not sure. I think Jim Jordan might write his own book. I think he is that kind of narcissist. Now, Donald Trump never wrote his own book. Those were all ghostwritten. I love the fact that he wrote the best book, Mr. Art of the Deal, written by somebody else. But evidently the NRCC has purchased $75,000 worth of Jim Jordan's crappy book. And that is, I guess they're going to hand out maybe. And this is one of the things that how the moneyed interests keep Republican politicians in line. And Democrats somewhat do this too a little bit, not nearly as much as Republicans do, because it really is about the money. I've had people go, why is it that, Democrats seem to be all over the map? It's like herding cats on the Democratic side. The big tent, there are so many interests all over the place. How do you bring them all together? The same way you do with the Republicans, because the Republicans are the same kind of scatterbrain. They're all over the place. Until you start going, there's a hierarchy. They're the people with the money. And they have their think tanks. And their think tanks hand out the marching orders. It's pretty simple. And they go to leadership. Leadership keeps people in control, and they keep the money. Just like herding cats. How do you herd cats? Food. That's it. That's the only way. Big pile of food. Cats come running. My cat hates me because I don't like my cat. But the second I open the bag of treats for the dog, the cat comes running and stands right next to the dog waiting, because the cat knows if I'm giving something to the dog, my wife is going to guilt me into giving something to the cat. And that's how it plays in my house. And this is how the Republicans have kept people in line. It is about the money. And on the Democratic side too, because look, we got Joe Manchin. How do they keep Joe Manchin in line? It's all about the money. It is. And reality, we talked yesterday about the proposal that the president came out with on Monday. The budget proposal that is dead on arrival. We're never going to probably do a budget ever again in the history of this country because we don't have the political ability to do it anymore. But the idea of putting a 20% minimum tax on billionaires, which you go, duh, how hard is that? I mean, we're not talking Eisenhower-esque tax rate here. We're not talking a 92% top marginal tax rate, folks. We're talking 20% minimum. We're talking, Jeff Bezos. You don't get away with nothing. You don't get away with having so much money that your secretary pays more than you do. You don't get that. You don't get away with having the person who handed you the food out the window at the drive-thru paying a higher tax rate than you do. You don't get to be one of the 47% of poor people who don't pay federal taxes. You are not poor. So the president said we're going to raise $360 billion in revenue by imposing this 20% minimum tax on people with incomes of over $100 million a year, of which there is a small percentage of people that earn $100 million a year. That seems reasonable. It's not even the 40 million that I think it was AOC had the audacity to bring up. Or the 10 million I think it was Elizabeth Warren had brought out. We're talking 100 million. Well, Joe Manchin has thrown cold water all over that because he says you can't tax something that's not earned. Earned income is what we're based on. And that's the problem. That is a big problem because people who go and punch a clock like you and me, people who go to work every day and do an honest day's work for an honest day's pay, even though that honest day's pay keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter, even though our days get longer and longer. You pay on every hour, every minute that you labor. Our billionaire class, who the hardest day's work most of them do is shifting money from one pocket to another, as long as they're not selling their assets, they're not paying taxes on it. And most of them live off of loans. Most of them all continue to borrow money, go into debt to pay things off, and then take depreciation, do all these kind of gimmicks to where they can live the high life and not actually have any income, but are worth billions. And this is where you better figure out how to tax that. And they better do it quick, because we're creating a system where the ownership class has walked away from the responsibility of this country. And the income base of the country is diminishing. And you wonder why our debt keeps growing. And I have people saying all the time, well, our debt keeps growing. How are we going to pay this off? Well, we've got a gigantic and enormous, the biggest billionaire class we've ever had. Maybe since we built that with taking on all this debt, maybe we can get them to pay for some of it. Just a thought. I would love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. If you've got a thought, question, comment, you want to join in on that. I got lots to get to, lots to talk about today. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. If you're just joining us, just tuning in, make sure you grab the podcast so you never miss a moment. Take the program on the go wherever you go, and it's always available there at the website or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, make sure you follow us on social media, Twitter @Rick Smith Show, YouTube, Facebook, all of those places. Remember to like, share, subscribe, all of it. Right back after this. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So this is one of those moments where, you know, I look at the reality that we need massive labor law reform. We need help to get things moving in the right direction. We need the PRO Act more than ever. And good on Patty Murray. And I want to throw that out real quick to say, you know, Patty Murray has been one of the champions in getting the message out on why we need major labor law reform, why we need folks to be able to join and form unions. And I love the woman who's at the NLRB and some of the stuff that she's proposing, bringing back the Joy Silk Doctrine and things like that. In the coming days and weeks, we're going to bring on some labor attorneys to explain the kind of changes that she's talking about. And I think really, really important stuff. Let's go to the phone lines. Got Gary on line 1. Gary, how are you today?
Fine. I really like. I started listening to you about 2-3 months ago. And I'm crying about those taxes. You know, there's got to be more said. I wish the Democrats would say more. You know, they kind of been knocked out too. They have to raise money too from these bad cats, but a lot less than Republicans. But anyways, the Republicans, they talk about tax breaks. It's always income tax, which hits the wealthy, and it's inheritance tax, because that's when they ship the billions down to their kids or their millions without paying much taxes anymore. So it's been outright class warfare. And then we got to pay the taxes, but we don't have the kind of money to cover it all. Maybe that's why it's such a big debt.
Yep.
And, you know, our property taxes went up. We didn't have sales taxes here in Minnesota until 67. And the college kids go away in debt. They used to fund education. LBJ, you can say what you want about is that Vietnam, but, man, economically, he got his civil rights, and he built the cities up. The cities were never in such good shape. And then the Republicans say the poverty program failed. That's because they started electing them jokers. So that's basically what I'm saying.
No, it's good stuff, Gary. Appreciate it, man. Thanks. And, you know, Gary's spot on accurate here. You know, the reality is we've created this billionaire class and what they've done and masterfully. And I'm glad Gary pointed this out about Minnesota, that, you know, what they did is in the past, you know, corporate taxes, taxes on the wealthy, that used to fund education. It used to fund highway programs. How did we fund Eisenhower's expansion of the interstate highway system? You know, how did we fight our wars and pay for them? We had a 92% top marginal tax rate on wealthy people. We had a 56% corporate tax rate. And they paid higher taxes. Now, no one paid 92%. The effective rate was in the 60s. But it wasn't zero, which is where they're getting away with now. And what has happened over the years, and masterfully, Republicans and some corporate Democrats have been masters at this, is it's been a shell game. Well, we didn't raise taxes on the wealthy, but we've raised fees. Mitt Romney was masterful at this in Massachusetts. Never raised taxes, no, but raised fees 500 times. So every time you went to get your driver's license, every time you got your license plates, every time you went to get a marriage license, every time you went to get a fishing license, every time you went to get a hunting license, whatever you got, a building permit, whatever, the fees kept going up, 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 and up. Same thing with the state tax. They came out with that because, hey, we need to raise revenue, state income tax, sales tax, whatever, because they had to get revenue from somewhere because, hey, we were building the wealthiest wealth class in the history of civilization. And that was the goal. And look, it has worked masterfully. People say, our tax code isn't working. Yeah, it's working the way it was designed. They say, well, our trade policies aren't working. No, working exactly as it was designed. These things are working the way the think tanks have gamed them out. These things are working exactly as the wealth class of this country wants. It benefits them, and it puts workers at a disadvantage, makes workers desperate. And the more we can pit workers against each other, and the old Jay Gould quote, I can pay half the working class to murder the other half. The good thing is they don't even have to pay anymore because we're voluntarily picking sides and then eating each other. This is what I'm hoping at some point we all wake up to, because this is the amazing part. Sitting in this chair and doing this program, and I'm very fortunate, and thank you for everyone who tunes in, and I'm grateful for everyone who does. I get people of all political stripes and thoughts who send me emails and thoughts, and I got a bunch of emails I wanted to get to here. But no matter what people come at me with, generally they identify the same problems. Now, they come at it from different angles. Either it's globalization, or it's poverty, or it's horrible bosses, or whatever the big problem, our trade policies, whatever. But we're always spoon-fed who to believe or who to blame or where to go. Instead of going, how do we focus on fixing the problem and not who so much to blame? Now, look, I had someone the other day say, our global trade policies are bad, and the globalization's, forcing us on other countries, and, we're forcing people to do this and that. And you go, yeah, this isn't new. And his idea was, we're going to blame Hillary. It's all Hillary's fault. And I'm going, this stuff was going on long before Hillary. This has been the corporatist mentality for decades. Smedley Butler wrote a piece back in the 30s called War is a Racket, where he went through and said, he was high-priced muscle for the sugar interests and the bank boys and all of the corporate interests, and went through all the money he made for that era's wealth class. Because we've always used our military as high-priced muscle to be able to wiggle in corporate special interests so that the wealthy can do well. And we're told that it trickles down to the rest of us. But the sad reality is, as the years have gone on, education has gotten more expensive for our kids. Healthcare has gotten almost out of reach for a lot of families, and way too expensive for most. The opportunities that I thought were possible as a kid, I fear are not going to be there for that kid that grew up in the same housing project that I grew up, is growing up right now in the projects that I grew up in. And that's sad. And it's something that we've got to fight back against. And how do we do that? We do it through smart policy. We do it by electing people who understand what the problem is and commit to fixing it. That's my idea. I would love to hear yours. And Gary, I appreciate the call. Thanks so much. You can also email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, if you've got thoughts. I'm going to get to these emails, I promise. I said I was going to. If you're just joining us and you've missed any of the program, I hear I have a podcast, and I hear it's a really good one. My wife keeps telling me about it. So if you want to download that, wherever you get your podcasts, grab that. Take it with you wherever you go. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1870. That was the day the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was adopted. It was the third of the Reconstruction Amendments. It prohibited voting restrictions on the basis of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Premier historian Eric Foner states that the Reconstruction Amendments reflected, quote, a newly empowered national state and the idea of a national citizenry enjoying equality before the law. These legal changes also arose from the militant demands for equal rights from former slaves themselves. The bulk of southern states refused to ratify, but then capitulated. Interestingly, New York sought and failed to revoke its earlier ratification. The amendment split the women's suffrage movement for its failure to codify women's voting rights. Some radical Republicans also abstained on the basis that it did not also prohibit poll taxes and literacy tests. Immediately, the 15th Amendment came under attack. The Ku Klux Klan terrorized black voters and Reconstruction governments for years. One of the most extreme examples was the 1873 Colfax Massacre. After the Compromise of 1877, President Rutherford B. Hayes refused to enforce civil rights protections. The rise of discriminatory Jim Crow laws effectively disenfranchised Southern blacks for nearly a century. Congress would finally enforce the 15th Amendment fully through the Landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965. However, the act has come under attack most recently, as in the 2013 case Shelby versus Holder. Jurisdictions with histories of voter restrictions no longer have to obtain pre-clearance before implementing changes to voting laws and practices. Over 150 years after the end of the Civil War, African Americans are still fighting to protect their right to vote. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Keep On Trucking was an iconic underground cartoon created in 1968 by comic master Robert Crumb. Featuring various big-footed men strutting jauntily through life, the caricature became widely popular as an expression of young people's collective optimism. "You're moving on down the line," Crumb later explained. "It's proletarian, it's populist." But today, the phrase has become ironic, for America's truck drivers themselves are no longer moving on down the line of fairness, justice, and opportunity. What had been a skilled middle-class job in the 1960s is now largely a skilled poverty wage job, thanks to the industry's relentless push for deregulation and deunionization, decoupling drivers from upward mobility. Trucking has been turned into a corporate racket, with CEOs arbitrarily abusing the workers who move their products across town and country. To enable the abuse, corporate lawyers have fabricated a legal dodge, letting shippers claim that their truck drivers are not their employees but independent contractors. Thus, hocus pocus, drivers don't get decent wages, overtime pay, workers' comp, Social Security, health care, rest breaks, reimbursement for truck expenses, including gasoline, tires, repair, and insurance, and, as contractors, drivers are not allowed to unionize. This rank ripoff has become the industry standard, practiced by multi-billion-dollar shipping giants like XPO, FedEx, Penske, and Amazon. This is Jim Hightower saying, of course, corporate bosses try to hide their greed with a thin, legalistic fig leaf. Quote, "We believe our driver classifications are legal," sniffed an XPO executive. Sure they are, sport, since your lobbyists write the laws. But might does not make right. Legal does not mean moral, and boss, spelled backwards, is double SOB.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, wow, oh wow, yesterday we talked about the phone logs. 457 minutes of no calls being logged by the White House, by the White House switchboard, which I got to tell you seems really odd. Seems very odd that for that length of period of time during the middle of the day that you would have no calls in or out of the White House being logged. But here's the weird thing. Now they're saying, there was actually a call placed to Senator Mike Lee, which was a number recorded on one of their numbers that doesn't show up on the call log. Could this be a bad thing? Now the weird thing is we're seeing all this stuff coming out. You've got the judge the other day saying likely guilty of 2 felonies, big stuff. The call logs, all this stuff now piling up. Does Merrick Garland finally come around to do something? Because, like I've been saying, quiet as church mice. And here to share some thoughts on what we may be seeing in the coming weeks and months, I've asked Renato Mariotti to come talk with us. Renato's a former federal prosecutor and host of the fabulous On Topic podcast, one of my favorite legal podcasts. Make sure you put it in your rotation. Renato, thanks for taking time for us.
Anytime.
So let's start there. The phone logs. 457 minutes seems a bit excessive. I mean, I don't think my phone has 457 minutes of no calls coming in and out through the middle of any day. I can't imagine the White House switchboard, one of the busiest places on earth, having that kind of lack of traffic. Seems fishy to me.
Yeah, I got to say, you and I we're never the president of the United States, right? A lot of people on a day when there's an insurrection happening at the Capitol, you would think that the president of the United States would be talking to somebody about it. I doubt he was just reading the paper and eating popcorn that day. So and frankly, as I think you alluded to with the Mike Lee conversation, there are actually a number of people who reported having conversations with him that day. And so I will tell you, Rick, if I was investigating this matter, that would be the first place I'd start. I would talk to people who actually were confirmed to have conversations with them, see if they're willing to, if they're going to testify, if they have memories, if they have their own call logs of phone calls that day with the president.
Yeah, I mean, Jim Jordan, it's confirmed Jordan had a conversation with him, right? Meadows, McCarthy, there are three that we know of. Any more that you can think of? I mean, those are the first three that come to my mind.
Yeah, well, I think he also, I mean, there were also people associated with that whole Stop the Steal effort. I mean, I'd be interested in taking a look at Rudy Giuliani's call logs, some of the, Jenna Ellis, some of those other folks. I mean, the conversations, whether or not they're privileged, which is a whole separate issue, the fact of a call, the fact of the phone call and a phone log is not. And that's something that I would be honing in on right away, because that raises the question of why they're not on the logs. Why were those logs not kept? Why were they scrubbed? Why are they incomplete?
Yeah. Now the interesting part is, people were wondering, why did the committee want everyone's phone records? And this is the interesting part to me, because I've been saying for a long time that January 6th, you saw a bunch of people running around with their cell phones, recording their treason, and without even the thought that that thing that they're carrying in their pocket, basically is a beacon, following them around, tracking their every movement and their every phone call. And there is an electronic record of everything they did that day. And it's out there and available with the right subpoena in the right prosecutor's hands. So this committee, if they were to get all this information, could they not put all of this together?
Well, it's something that we do in a lot of other contexts and other types of prosecutions. Back in the day, I did most of my time as a white collar prosecutor. But when I first started out as a junior prosecutor, before I did white collar, I was focusing on drug cartel cases. And a lot of those cases, you start with phone records and you build phone charts and you show that all these phones were in contact with each other many, many different times in the middle of that deal. So that happens in all sorts of cases, that prosecutors look at phone records and piece things together. Here, of course, you have a gap. And I think the question is, who's he talking to in that gap? What phones is he using? I mean, can you imagine, Rick, if the president of the United States is using a burner phone, or we've had some reports in the past that he's used like a Secret Service member's phone or a staffer's phone.
Yeah.
Like, why? What does he have to hide? He's the president of the United States.
But Renato,
why is he? What's he doing?
He's never heard of a burner phone. He's never heard of it.
Yeah.
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it.
You and I yeah, exactly. Didn't that sound to you like a statement written by a lawyer? Not familiar with that term. It's not the way Donald Trump talks.
And I love the fact that John Bolton came out and said, no, we've had that conversation numerous times.
Yeah, John Bolton, I will tell you, where was this John Bolton when it actually mattered, right? That guy's memory has suddenly become much more sharpened as of late.
No, but from people who know John Bolton, and I know several people who know him well, the one thing they tell me about him is that he takes copious amounts of notes, that every word you say to him somewhere is in a notebook. He's one of those people who writes everything down. So you don't even want to, muse around him, because he's got it written. He's that kind of, I was going to use the word weasel, but I couldn't think of one stronger than that. He's that kind of guy.
Hey, he actually is the prosecutor's best friend. The prosecutors love those kind of people. Okay, there's those people who take notes all the time, who log all their catalog all their emails, the people who they've got tabs, in their binder, and they've got everything highlighted. They love those folks. So there's always the note taker. That's always the prosecutor's best friend. So if John Bolton would actually speak up when it matters, maybe prosecutors would get somewhere.
When it matters. I'm finding that a lot, because a lot of the stuff that we were talking about during the 4 years that the former guy was in power, actually that we were talking about actually has happened. And now people go, oh yeah, we've got the evidence now after the fact. Where were your profiles and courage when we actually needed them? You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Renato Mariotti. Renato is a former federal prosecutor, host of the fabulous On Topic podcast. Make sure you check that out. We'll get links out on social media how you can do that. Now, I wanted to get your thoughts. Judge on Monday, this made a bunch of news. Judge David Carter, in his legal opinion on emails about Eastman and the privilege of that stuff. Unfortunately, we're going to maybe get to see that. Came out and said, look, there are possible crimes here. 2 major ones, 2 felonies. Do you think Garland and the DOJ, do you think they eventually move on something like this?
Well, I think they're paying attention to that. I think, Rick, the biggest hurdle that a lot of them are trying to get their head around in the Justice Department is that we've never had a case like this before. It's not like, I mentioned drug cases before. There's certain types of cases that are bread and butter for the Justice Department. A drug case, a gun case, a bank robbery, fraud cases, straightforward, okay? But a case where involving insurrection against the United States, that sort of thing, that did not come up much. I mean, unless you're a prosecutor from 1865 on a time machine, you don't have a lot of experience with those cases. And I think that what the judge's opinion did is it showed that, here you have a judge who's saying, this looks to him like obstruction of an official proceeding. In other words, not just the people beating down the doors, and jumping in the congressional chamber, going into Nancy Pelosi's office, but actually people like John Eastman, a lawyer giving dishonest advice to Trump. That guy was obstructing an official proceeding. And so to have a judge say that, I think is something the Justice Department is going to have to think about when they are determining, well, is there a risk that our case is going to get tossed out of court?
Yeah, and
so I think it's helpful.
Especially now that you got Mo Brooks coming out and saying, all of it's true. I was telling him not to do it. Now you could say he's a jilted lover, and you could go that route because Trump is pulling his endorsement. But it doesn't make what he's saying not true.
Yeah, that was really remarkable. I actually, one thing it also suggests to me, Rick, is maybe Trump's power is waning a little bit in that party. Maybe because he's involved in a race right now, and he feels comfortable, distancing himself from Trump. It's going to be interesting to see. But I have to say that was really something, and I think it goes to the fact that Trump knew all along that this was not true, that he didn't win the election, that it was all a charade in an effort to overturn the election. Yeah. And that's what I think what Mo Brooks' statement goes to.
Now, I've been taking the position because a lot of listeners, I've been getting emails and contacts of people going, Merrick Garland's not going to do anything. Merrick Garland's weak. Democrats are weak. You know the line. I'm sure you've heard it too, because they haven't acted quick enough. I've been saying, hold the water a little bit because nothing's coming out of the DOJ. I mean, in New York, you saw those 2 prosecutors who quit because they're like, hey, we're not getting anything done. We're out of here. There was a protest in public. I'm taking the position, and I hope you'll back me up. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. That since we're not hearing any leaks, we're not hearing anything, which is really rare in my opinion. Again, you can back me up or not. That maybe something's going on because it's been church mouse silent coming out of the DOJ as far as where I'm sitting. I'm curious your thoughts.
So here's what I think. I think that there's certainly nothing that's happened where I don't think they've made a decision that they'll never do anything. I think they're taking a careful approach. And if that surprises you, that Merrick Garland is taking a careful approach, then you don't know much about the guy. Okay, this is not some strident guy. This guy's a judge for 20 plus years. Right. Okay, so he's, the fact that he's approaching it methodically, carefully, slowly, not entirely surprising to me. I think they are considering the matter, and I think they care about and are listening to the fact that commentators and others and people in the Senate and Congress are saying that something needs to be done and Trump needs to be held accountable. I think their concern is that they do not want to take a case and lose. They do not want to have Trump be able to say he's been exonerated. And so it's because it's harder to put these cases together that people on Twitter would have you believe. I think they're taking a very careful, methodical approach. That's what I think is going on.
Yeah, but here's where my problem is, and this is where I think you got to fight the fight, and even if you lose, you still got to get in there and ball up your little digits and throw the punch. Because if you don't, then this sets a bizarre precedent. I mean, this past administration is historic in so many ways because there are so many potential crimes. I mean, we had the Mueller report come out that basically said there are 10 crimes in there that should be investigated and moved on, and yet nobody's talking about the Mueller report at this moment. I haven't heard a peep about it in months.
Yeah, it's interesting because to me, Rick, as a former prosecutor, that is the most straightforward thing. There's a lot of people on the internet will say, oh, there's tons of crimes that Trump did. To me, that's the easiest one for me to say very solidly, yes, he could be prosecuted for that because we see the evidence. We have an experienced, prosecutor, and Robert Mueller and his team wrote a very detailed report outlining the testimony, outlining the evidence. We know there's a case there. And Merrick Garland's Justice Department has not brought it. And I will say I am critical that they have not at least come forward and explain what they're doing there, what decision they've made. And I do think the public deserves an explanation there, for sure.
Yeah, I'm there. Now it came out this week, and I've been calling for this for, 14 months, pretty much the entire time that Biden has been in the White House. We need more lawyers at the Department of Justice to prosecute all the criming that went on January 6th. They are now, I guess it's been reported, they are looking for 131 new lawyers at the DOJ to help out. So Renato, the country needs you. We need you to get in there and prosecute some of these cases.
You know what? I could be talked into it. So if my former law school classmate, who's the U.S. attorney in D.C., needs some help, he knows where to find me. But I will say they are hiring. I see it on my LinkedIn feed all the time. They are hiring federal prosecutors in D.C. They are looking for folks to handle a lot of cases arising out of January 6th. So I do think that at least some message is being sent, even though it's not exactly what you and I were hoping for.
Yeah, in your opinion, has this taken too long already? I mean, are the wheels of justice, in your opinion, as a former federal prosecutor, is this taking about the right amount of time? Is it taking too long, too slow? As the wheels of justice roll, in your experience, are we seeing this go in the right amount of time? Because look, I want to see maximum sentences yesterday, but just because I see how important this moment is. But I'm curious from your experience, how's this played out?
I'm concerned, because Rick, I have not really seen any signs publicly that there is an investigation, and I would like to think that if some of the Trumpsters were being brought in to testify, or were under getting some heat, that they would be making noise publicly, trying to raise money for their legal defense funds or trying to cry foul. So I am concerned about that. And I will just say probably my biggest concern, Rick, is I have not really seen much publicly coming out of the Justice Department about what they're going to do to deal with the politicization of the Justice Department under Trump. What reforms are we going to have to make sure that the next time we have some right-winger in there who's an authoritarian, maybe Ron DeSantis or, J.D. Vance or Ted Cruz or whoever it is, when that person's in office, what are we going to have in place to make sure that we don't have a repeat of what happened last time?
Oh, God, Ted Cruz, J.D. Vance. Are you kidding?
Hey, man, I'm just saying it could get worse. Trump was bad. Trump was bad, but he was incompetent. Could you imagine a competent Trump? Oh no. Like somebody who was actually effective at achieving his evil goals. Like God only knows.
As if my day wasn't bad enough. So last question I've got for you. Obviously you don't have a crystal ball like I don't, but in your expert opinion, do you, seeing what the rest of us see from your eye, do you see that it's possible that Trump will face charges, or do you fear, as I do, that we've never gone and prosecuted a president for crimes while in office and that he just skates through this and we don't. How do you see this playing out?
I'm a lawyer, so I'll take your words literally. You say possible. Anything's possible, Rick. Is it possible? Sure. Would I bet much on it? Would I bet money on it? Bet my house on it? Absolutely not. And that's the truth. So I'm with you on that.
There you go. The podcast, On Topic, fabulous stuff. Make sure you check out Renato Mariotti's On Topic podcast. We'll get links out. Fabulous stuff. Renato, I appreciate the time. As always, great talking with you, my friend.
Thanks. Anytime.
Good stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Do you think it's possible? Do you think we're going to be going after the former guy and maybe fitting him with some steel bracelets? Something? Anything? 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1930. That was the day that ground was broken on what would become one of the worst workplace disasters in U.S. history. At least 476 and possibly more than 700 men died from a disease called silicosis. The project was called the Hawk's Nest Tunnel. It was part of a hydroelectric project by the company Union Carbide. The aim was to harness the energy of the New River in West Virginia to power a metals plant. Workers cut through 3 miles of solid rock under the Gauley Mountain to divert water for the project. Most of the workers were black men recruited from the South. Much of the rock they were cutting through had a very high silica content. Despite the fact that the dangers of silica dust were well known, the company ignored standard safety practices. It is safer to drill through high silica content using a wet drill method, which cuts down on the dust. The project manager opted to use dry drilling to save time on the project. They also failed to provide the needed ventilation or respirators for the workers. Men desperate for work during the Great Depression flocked to the project. In all, nearly 5,000 men labored on the tunnel. A congressional subcommittee that investigated the disaster found that the whole driving of the tunnel was begun, continued, and completed with grave and inhumane disregard of all consideration for the health, lives, and future of the employees. For many, work on the Hawks Tunnel was a death sentence. People with silicosis die a slow, agonizing, suffocating death. The companies involved in the project faced litigation, but in the end, they only paid out $200,000 in damages. Some that were impacted received as little as $30 for their lives.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So, I look at this and, impeached twice, at least 10 counts that Mueller came up with during the Mueller investigation that should be pursued and prosecuted. The fact that you've got David Carter saying there are at least 2 felonies surrounding all of the things that they did after the election, probably more. All of the stuff that went on in Manhattan, all of the stuff with the business dealings. There are gangsters going, wow, Teflon Don, man. How's he get away with all this? And I think Renato hit it on the head. They're afraid of going after the king and missing. They're afraid of not knocking him off his perch and only making him stronger, which by not going after him, I think makes him stronger. I think you have to do it. Let's go to the phone lines. Got Alice on line 1. Alice, how are you today?
I'm good. I am thinking to myself, the former White House was grifters, tramps, and thieves.
There was a song like that, wasn't there?
Well, that was gypsies, tramps, and thieves, but,
We'll go with grifters.
Yeah, well, think about it. And I don't think I need to expand on the tramp part. Use your imagination. But anyway,
Do I have to?
Well, do whatever. I don't care. I'm open-minded that way. I honestly think that they are. They're afraid. For some reason, it's the Democrats. We're being held hostage by the Republicans and the right wing because every time we go to investigate something, they start this crying thing and going, you're going after us because we're patriots, because we're Christians, because we're Republicans. And they just don't want to hear them cry. I mean, honestly, that's my honest opinion. It's like, you know what, folks? You better wake up because you're going to wake up and find out that you've all got your heads chopped off and we're living in a theocracy back in the Middle Ages. Thanks a lot.
I'm with you. No, I mean, the reality is that we're going after you because you're criminals.
Yeah, and they are. I mean, you know, they're making this big deal over Hunter Biden. Well, what I want to know is when we're going to investigate Ivanka and Don Jr. and Eric and all their little business dealings, you know. But we can't do that because somebody might cry.
I hear you, but hey, whatever Vlad's got, Don wants. So you know, I guess it just shows where his moral compass lines up. But I appreciate the thoughts, Alice. Great stuff.
Have a good one.
As always, good stuff. No, it's the world that we are currently in. Mr. Impeached twice. Man, I just sometimes shake my head. And I wasn't going to get into the Hunter Biden stuff because, you know, we've always had a kind of, you know, I go back to Billy Carter and Billy Beer, and there's always been an attempt to get the politicians through siblings and brothers and children, and that's always been there. And it's been one of those things you go, I really have never cared. Because they've never really tied it back. They're not going to tie this back to Biden. They're going to make Hunter Biden look bad, and he is. He's probably made a lot of shady deals, as have Donald and Eric and Dumb Jr. and Ivanka and the rest of them, the whole Trump cabal. And if you were to get into the Kush and the rest of them, the slumlord deals that they've made, there's tons of shady stuff. But the right does it much more directed than the left does. They get on to one thing, and they stay on it like a dog on a chew toy. And they make it sound like that one thing is so egregious. The story about the mayor of Moscow or something, the mayor's wife giving Hunter Biden $3.5 million, which has been discredited numerous times. And look, do I know that he did or did not get the money? I don't. But in this moment, do you really think that it matters to Joe Biden whether Hunter Biden got $3.5 million from the mayor's wife in Moscow? Look at what he's doing. Look at the decisions he's making on Vlad. You would think if there's a payoff, there's a quid pro quo that goes with that. And I haven't seen that quid pro quo. And that's the next step that the right never takes. What was the payoff? No, you go back to Trump's first impeachment. The quid pro quo was, I'll give you money for arms to defend yourself, but you got to give me dirt. You got to go do my evil bidding. That was worthy of impeachment. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you're just joining us, make sure you grab the podcast. I'm told it's pretty good, and I'm told we've got one, and it's a pretty good one. Rick@thericksmithshow.com. Email ricksmithshow.com for podcast or wherever you get your podcasts. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people. Time to talk.
This investment we are doing right now is also an investment in the decarbonizing of our economy.
A new plan to wean Europe off Russian fossil fuels. Exposé reveals how Senator Joe Manchin used his public office for personal financial gain. Plus,
we really did not anticipate seeing ice shelf collapse here.
Ice shelf the size of Rome collapses following Antarctic heat wave.
All of those disasters and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
And you know what? Pete Buttigieg can take his electric vehicles and his bicycles, and he and his husband can stay out of our girls' bathrooms.
Why would two gay men want to be in the girls' bathroom with electric bicycles? This is your Marjorie Taylor Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, progressive journalist and the co-screenwriter of one of last Sunday's Best Picture Oscar nominees, Don't Look Up, David Sirota, tweeted that night, quote, "My thoughts on the Oscar slap incident are that it's 70 degrees in Antarctica and what's left of the livable ecosystem is being destroyed, and so we should focus on that."
Good point.
He's got a single mind there. By the way, it was 70 degrees warmer than usual in Antarctica. It wasn't actually 70 degrees.
Good point as well.
What do you got for us today?
Well, first up, President Biden and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on Friday announced a new joint task force to wean Europe off of its reliance on Russian fossil fuel imports that indirectly fund Russia's war on Ukraine and gives Russia leverage over Europe. The U.S. will work with other nations to boost rapidly expanding exports of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, to Europe to replace Russian gas, ramping it up through at least 2030. Now, that will likely require new LNG infrastructure, which climate experts warn will lock in the use of natural gas for decades, thereby undercutting Europe's ambitious climate goals. But under the deal, the new infrastructure would be built so that it can be converted later to transport green hydrogen.
Good.
The deal also accelerates plans to cut demand long-term via faster deployment of electric heat pumps and energy efficiency upgrades.
Very good.
Plus, the EU will expedite planning and approval for new clean energy projects. Here's President Biden in his weekend speech in Warsaw, Poland.
Over the long term, as a matter of economic security and national security for the survivability of the planet, we all need to move as quickly as possible to clean, renewable energy. And we'll work together to help get that done so that the days of any nation being subject to the whims of a tyrant for its energy needs are over. They must end. They must end.
Russia, meanwhile, is trying to unilaterally alter contracts to force Europe to pay for Russian gas in Russian rubles, seen as an attempt to prop up the collapsed currency by forcing countries to buy it.
I am altering the deal. Pray I don't alter it any further.
On Monday, G7 countries rejected Russia's demands, but a senior Russian Federation Council member warned that if Europe doesn't accept the change of terms, Russia might terminate their gas supplies altogether.
Nice heat furnaces you have there. Would be a shame if something happened to them.
The move will test European leaders' resolve to stick together through the rest of the winter with reduced gas supplies while maintaining those economic sanctions.
We will hope for a sticky winter.
In other news, an ice shelf about the size of New York City completely collapsed off of East Antarctica over the weekend, according to satellite data. It came just days after record high temperatures of more than 70 degrees Fahrenheit above normal hit some areas of the icy polar region. The Conger ice shelf collapse by itself will not raise global sea levels, but it worries scientists because it was in a region long thought to be stable, not susceptible to climate change, meaning that previous assumptions about East Antarctica's stability could be wrong.
Wow, they had no idea that this ice shelf the size of Rome was going to collapse?
Yep.
Oy.
Finally, the New York Times has published a remarkable expose expanding on previous reporting by The Intercept that shows how Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of the coal state of West Virginia has used his career in public office to enrich himself. And the Times has receipts through extensive documents and interviews showing that, quote, at every step of his political career, Manchin helped a West Virginia power plant that is the sole customer of his private coal business. Manchin's coal company supplies a special low-grade coal to the power plant. Plus, Manchin receives a slice of that power plant's revenue from the electric bills paid by his constituents. Quote, at every level of Manchin's political career, from state lawmaker to U.S. senator, his official actions have benefited his financial interest in the plant for private gain, all while he blocks climate action at every step.
You know what? Someone ought to make a law against that. Check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you
tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I was watching news reports today of, remember yesterday we talked a little bit about the fact that Russia was going to be pulling back a little bit as the talks were going to happen, because maybe there was some hope that they were not going to go on murdering people for a little, just a little respite. Well, turns out not quite so much the truth. Which, surprise, surprise, don't believe anything a murderous dictator is going to tell you. But my question is, with all of the people who are, losing their homes as we're watching these buildings, residential buildings being just demolished by these missiles and these bombings, and the people who are fleeing the country, what are we going to do with them? Even if the war were to stop today, what do you do with the millions of people, some 4 or 5 million who've crossed into other countries, and the millions who are left in country with nowhere to live, where their lives have been exploded before their very eyes? What is the world going to do? That's going to be a huge question, and nobody's talking about it yet, which is why I've asked Elisa Massimino to come talk with us. She's a National Security Senior Fellow over at the Center for American Progress, AmericanProgress.org, their website. They've got a piece out on this, on what the European Union and the United States needs to do to address the migration crisis that's going on in Ukraine. Elisa, thanks for taking time for us.
Great to be with you, Rick.
So, I'm looking at this and, my mindset, and you watch these images, you see these videos, and it is absolutely heartbreaking seeing what this madman is doing to this country and to these people. Even if he were to win and take over the country, he's like an abusive husband who, if I can't have you, nobody will. He's just trashing the entire country. I don't know what's going to be left on the other side of this, and these poor people are just devastated.
Yeah, it's really the fastest and largest refugee crisis in Europe since World War II. It's massive, and the worst case scenario that the UN had spelled out earlier this month when all this started was 4 million refugees, and we're already past that. Just weeks into this conflict. And then inside the country, it's about 6.5 million. That's growing every day, of people who've been displaced from their homes by violence, and a whole bunch of people who are just trapped inside this maelstrom, and there's no safe way out. You've seen Putin has been, bombing, saying there's going to be humanitarian corridors, and then bombing. You mentioned all those pictures that we're seeing. That's what war crimes look like, and we have to make sure that there's accountability somewhere down the line for all of that. But as you said, right now we have to focus on how can we help these people. And the good news story is that Europe, and it was not at all a foregone conclusion, the Europeans have really stepped up. More than half of these refugees have gone to Poland, and 90% of them are women and children. And the Polish people have really, most of the operation has been volunteers.
Yeah. No, I've seen the images of, people driving to the border in their cars and taking people back to their homes. And, that's the kind of humanity that in this moment you want to see. I mean, we should be giving all the resources we can to ensure that those folks have the ability to feed and to house and to help these folks in this moment. But that can't last forever, Elisa.
No, it can't. And in fact, it shouldn't really last forever as a volunteer effort, because that's not sustainable. I mean, it can't last forever. And it's not safe, actually. When you have a population of refugees that are, women and children, you always have to worry about, the risks of people exploiting those folks, and human trafficking and sexual trafficking. So this volunteer effort, which has been so heartwarming, really now needs to be institutionalized, needs to be organized. You've got to have the resources to register people, keep track of people, make sure that they can, everybody wants to go home. Of course, all refugees want to go home. But, there's not, for a lot of them, there's not much left to go home to, and there won't be for quite some time. So we've got, a problem that's got several moving parts. One is take care of the ones who have crossed the border and fled, and get those kids in school, get them integrated and on their feet. I mean, one other really good thing, on a policy level that Europe did was to implement this temporary protection directive, which, one of the challenges in Europe with refugees, which we've seen with the Syrians and everything, is that, you have different countries setting different rules and different standards, and it's very complicated and people can't get protection. So the EU has implemented this kind of universal temporary protection directive, which means that you don't have to have individual adjudication of these cases. Who are these people? They're going to give all the Ukrainians who have fled, or everybody from Ukraine, not everybody is Ukrainian who has fled, a kind of guaranteed legal status and some basic rights for at least a year and up to 3 years. So that's huge. So no matter where they end up, that way there's none of this kind of like musical chairs where different countries are trying to push people across borders like Hungary did, Bulgaria and all of that. They're now, everybody's got the same standard. So
right.
That's one piece of the puzzle. Then the other, of course, and the much more challenging one, are these 6.5+ million people who are trapped inside, a war zone, and they don't have food. It is still winter. They are at serious, serious risk. And so, we need to, if there's negotiation going on at all, part of that has to be humanitarian corridors, safe pathways for people either to get out or for humanitarian relief to get in to those places, to save people's lives, because people cannot survive in this environment. So that's a much more complex problem, obviously, but we have to tackle that.
Now, is this something that the U.S. can do? Because look, we've been talking about what Europe's doing and what they can do. Being as far away as we are, clearly we're not going to be, shipping people across to come here. I mean, we're not going to have a huge refugee influx here. I know there are some. We're going to bring some, but I think our role should be resource. And I know the president has allocated some more funding to resource. The things that they need. Clearly, I think our resource should be making sure that humanitarian aid gets there. I think NATO should make an absolute attempt to fly in, if necessary, what needs to be done, and if need be, you do that with a military force.
Yeah, the Biden administration has definitely stepped up with funding and has pledged more. USAID is getting involved in it, the State Department. And that kind of leadership is really important because it draws other funding as well from other places. The U.S. can do a lot to lead without. You're absolutely right, Rick. It's not like we're not going to solve this problem by having all the refugees come here. Most of them don't want to come here, but it is important that the administration announced the other day that it would take in 100,000 people and try to do. There are Ukrainian families here, who live here, who want to try to get their families to safety and have them come here. And the Biden administration has said they're going to do that.
But 100,000 is a drop in the bucket, Elisa.
Drop in the bucket, but it is important as a symbolic gesture, and for those individuals, obviously, it's important. But to demonstrate that we're willing to do that, that's also very important. But the funding and the keeping the pressure on to address this crisis inside the country is really, really important right now.
Now, you're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're here with Elisa Massimino. She's the National Security Senior Fellow over at the Center for American Progress. AmericanProgress.org is the website if you want to take a look at their latest piece on what the European Union and the United States need to do to address the migration crisis in Ukraine. We'll get links out on social media on how you can take a look at that. But, Elisa, I look at this and, again, we've been watching the bombings. We've been watching just the sheer destruction of of these cities, and the rebuild is decades long. So I think a lot of people have this idea, we can do this in a couple of years, and this is decades long. This is generational. I mean, this is a kind of crisis that my generation, our generation, we've never, I think, never seen before.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly in Europe, that's true. I mean, we saw the same kind of devastation of major cities in the war in Syria, and that a similar kind of situation in which you had massive outflows of refugees and millions of children. I really think we have to focus a lot on what happens with these kids, because that can end up being a lost generation that creates its own problems down the road. But absolutely, and who's going to pay for that rebuilding? I mean, I think at the end of the day, a lot of that needs to come from the perpetrators of these atrocities, the government in Russia right now. So, I mean, I mentioned earlier that a lot of this devastation that we're seeing clearly constitutes war crimes. And there already are discussions now on how we're going to make sure, in the hopes, I think, of influencing some of the actors involved somewhere down the chain in the Russian army, that there will be consequences for these actions.
So you say somewhere down the chain. This doesn't mean Putin then. I mean, we're going to get some private eventually. But it wasn't me. He told me, and he told me, and he told me. Eventually, does it roll that far downhill to where it's never going to be Putin?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one area where we've actually made some progress over the last 20 years. We haven't succeeded in preventing this kind of thing, but it's absolutely true that that anybody involved in perpetrating this kind of aggression and war crime knows that there is a place in The Hague where people do get tried, and there are people now serving life sentences, and they're not the lowest down in the chain, from the Yugoslav war, from some of the atrocities in Sierra Leone, in other places.
How many of them were nuclear powers? How many of them are superpowers?
Right. No, you're right. You're right. But we have to use the tools that we have, and these are some of the tools that we have now. But of course, the thing we've got to figure out, that the absolute first priority is stopping the violence.
Right.
That's everything's going to snowball and continue to get worse until this war is stopped.
Excellent point. Let me ask you, are you encouraged by what you're seeing here in the U.S., by the response of we the people? I mean, we're a divided country. I mean, I think a lot of what went into Putin's calculus, and you can disagree, you're the expert, clearly, but I believe what went into some of his calculus is looking across into our country and seeing us so split apart politically and at each other's throat, that he didn't really think that we would come together the way that this country has. Are you surprised that as well as we've come together on this?
Well, it is encouraging. I do think, that it was part of a long-term strategy of Putin's to, he had a hand in sowing some of this division, and that was for a particular purpose of weakening the United States. So it is encouraging to see that we can come together around in a crisis like this. Of course, there are still some outliers, and people who are going to criticize the Biden administration no matter what it does. But it is encouraging to see on the Hill too, where people just barely will even talk to each other from different parties, coming together around you had a unanimous declaration to condemn Putin's actions as war crimes, and to encourage the investigation that Ukraine has asked of the International Criminal Court, which has been a hugely divisive issue between Democrats and Republicans, and they came together around that too. So there is hope.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful, but I'll tell you, I'm still surprised that there are still some in the Republican Party that seem to be sympathizers and asking Putin and Moscow for favors. I just
yeah.
And I'm not going to ask you to weigh in. That's not your position. It's not what I'm not taking you into those waters. I threw that in there for myself. But it is what it is. Last question I've got for you, because clearly more needs to be done. Next move for Biden, what should we be pushing him to do next?
On Ukraine and the refugees, for sure, to keep the both. We have to have both increased financial support and sustained pressure to keep the coalition together, to make those sanctions really hurt. We've got to focus on the things that will change the calculus for Putin so that we can stop the violence. I think that's got to be the highest priority right now.
I'm right there with you. Elisa, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much for your expertise, your knowledge. Great stuff.
Great to be here. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you so much, Elisa Massimino. Make sure you check out her piece over at AmericanProgress.org. We'll get links out on social media. You can find out what the EU and the U.S. should be doing. Quick break with your back after this with your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. Working people come to talk. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our Labor History in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Mike sent me an email that I found interesting. He said, your recent show hit one of my favorite topics, job-killing regulations, and oddly enough, one of my favorite topics as well. So thanks for the email, Mike. He writes, the constant call for deregulation and free market solutions ignores the obvious facts that most of corporate America cannot be trusted to self-regulate and will never be satisfied until they pay no taxes, have no environmental responsibility, and can manipulate the American worker as they please. Mike writes, I asked my Republican representatives to provide me with any environmental disaster, financial meltdown, or taxpayer-financed bailout that was caused by excessive regulation, but never receive an answer. He goes on to write, the Trump administration reported in 2018 that between 2006 and 2016, regulations with an economic impact of $100 million or more had a total cost of $59 to $88 billion and provided a benefit of $219 to $695 billion. Not a small gap there. Mike writes, studies show that regulations' effect on job loss are minimal, usually shifting jobs between industries, not killing jobs as Republicans claim. He writes, the great job killer is ignored is automation, and I think the worst is still to come. Republicans conveniently ignore the job loss due to automation since it adds to the profit of their corporate donors. And that again, that's an important point he makes, because we usually give them tax breaks when they automate because they're upgrading their machinery while getting rid of people. He goes on to say unregulated free market has given us the Gilded Age, past and present, monopolies, robber barons, sweatshops, child labor, the Great Depression, average inflation-adjusted salaries lower than 40 years ago, outsourcing of millions of American jobs, destruction of American manufacturing, and the looming collapse of the middle class. He says the most recent economic meltdown starting in 2008 destroyed the retirement dreams of millions, causing millions to lose their homes, and further eroded the economic well-beings for millions more. He goes on to say many will never recover from these setbacks, and yet those who caused the problems were never punished and in many cases rewarded for their actions. To make matters worse, business use taxpayer bailout money to lobby for repeal of the small amount of regulation that was put in place to prevent another such occurrence. Lack of regulation is the real job killer. He says the call for smaller government and less regulation is a ruse by those who want to manipulate policy to their advantage. As James Madison said, the power of all corporations ought to be limited. The growing wealth acquired by them never fails to be a source of abuses. And here's the thing. I couldn't say that any better myself, and I've said all of that at one point or another multiple times over the years because it's all spot on, accurate, and true. Thank you, Mike, for the email, and thank you for reiterating what I think is an incredibly important point, which is why I read the whole email. I don't often do that, but he was so succinct in every point and so spot on, because the system, like I've been saying, is working exactly the way it's supposed to. We're making the wealthy wealthier. We're making them their profits. We're making them their products. We're cleaning up their mess. We're taking care of them. Anytime there's a hiccup, they're the first in line to be fed. And yet, policies that will give our children education, make sure that everyone gets access to reasonable health care, affordable health care, those are deemed socialist, and wow, we can't possibly have that. And we're then means tested by it. And that's been always curious to me. I've always been a believer that you should be able to eat. You should be able to get a good education. And you should be able to get health care when you need it. When you're sick, you should be able to see a doctor. That is not radical. As a working class person, that should be the minimum. In the wealthiest country in the history of civilization, which we are, at its wealthiest point in history, which we are, those things are not unreasonable. And yet we're told by people like Joe Manchin, we can't afford it. Sorry, we would love to educate your children. We just can't afford it. And we're going to make things really divisive by claiming that these evil, bad people who are spending their lives educating your children are somehow trying to indoctrinate them with some theory about race that's critical, that nobody can explain and understand. But they're doing it, we know. Because they're creating this boogeyman. They're creating this fear. So that, again, we continue to eat each other. We continue to fight each other while they're literally robbing us blind. And at some point, we've got to talk to each other. If you think your kid's school is teaching critical race theory, here's an idea. Go to the classroom. Go talk to the teacher. There's a thought. They would love it. I've talked to teachers. They would love parental involvement. Oh my God, they would love it. It would be amazing. Trust me, they've said so. Love to hear your thoughts. And thank you for the email, Mike. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Also, podcast. You can get that at the website as well. Quick break, right back. Stick around. I'm I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1930. That was the day that ground was broken on what would become one of the worst workplace disasters in U.S. history. At least 476 and possibly more than 700 men died from a disease called silicosis. The project was called the Hawk's Nest Tunnel. It was part of a hydroelectric project by the company Union Carbide. The aim was to harness the energy of the New River in West Virginia to power a metals plant. Workers cut through 3 miles of solid rock under the Gauley Mountain to divert water for the project. Most of the workers were black men recruited from the South. Much of the rock they were cutting through had a very high silica content. Despite the fact that the dangers of silica dust were well known, the company ignored standard safety practices. It is safer to drill through high silica content using a wet drill method, which cuts down on the dust. The project manager opted to use dry drilling to save time on the project. They also failed to provide the needed ventilation or respirators for the workers. Men desperate for work during the Great Depression flocked to the project. In all, nearly 5,000 men labored on the tunnel. A congressional subcommittee that investigated the disaster found that the whole driving of the tunnel was begun, continued, and completed with grave and inhumane disregard of all consideration for the health, lives, and future of the employees. For many, work on the Hawks Tunnel was a death sentence. People with silicosis die a slow, agonizing, suffocating death. The companies involved in the project faced litigation, but in the end, they only paid out $200,000 in damages. Some that were impacted received as little as $30 for their lives.
Keep On Trucking was an iconic underground cartoon created in 1968 by comic master Robert Crumb. Featuring various big-footed men strutting jauntily through life, the caricature became widely popular as an expression of young people's collective optimism. "You're moving on down the line," Crumb later explained. "It's proletarian, it's populist." But today, the phrase has become ironic, for America's truck drivers themselves are no longer moving on down the line of fairness, justice, and opportunity. What had been a skilled middle-class job in the 1960s is now largely a skilled poverty-wage job, thanks to the industry's relentless push for deregulation and deunionization, decoupling drivers from upward mobility. Trucking has been turned into a corporate racket, with CEOs arbitrarily abusing the workers who move their products across town and country. To enable the abuse, corporate lawyers have fabricated a legal dodge, letting shippers claim that their truck drivers are not their employees but independent contractors. Thus, hocus pocus, drivers don't get decent wages, overtime pay, workers' comp, Social Security, health care, rest breaks, reimbursement for truck expenses, including gasoline, tires, repair, and insurance, and, as contractors, drivers are not allowed to unionize. This rank ripoff has become the industry standard, practiced by multi-billion-dollar shipping giants like XPO, FedEx, Penske, and Amazon. This is Jim Hightower saying, of course, corporate bosses try to hide their greed with a thin, legalistic fig leaf. Quote, "We believe our driver classifications are legal," sniffed an XPO executive. Sure they are, sport, since your lobbyists write the laws. But might does not make right. Legal does not mean moral, and boss, spelled backwards, is double SOB.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So we've all heard the news. We've all heard the stories. We've seen the headlines. Oh, my God, it's going to be a slaughter in November. Democrats are going to be destroyed. We've seen it. And look, I think Republicans have gone so far off the beaten path. The candidates, the crazy they've thrown out there, that's not assured. Even with it being a midterm election, even with the inflation being where it is and the gas prices being where it is. Because, look, there are some challenges. But I've never been a doomsday kind of person to begin with. I like AOC. I think some of the doom and gloom, a little far, not entirely unwarranted, but here's the thing. I love positivity, and that's why when I saw my good friend Matt McNeil put out a tweet today saying, quote, "For God's sake, Democrats, Biden's been in office 14 months, got a pandemic under control, passed an infrastructure bill, which is so good. Republicans are trying to take credit for it, jump-started the economy, and brought back NATO. Act like you're winning because you are." I gotta get my buddy Matt on the program. That's why I've asked Matt McMillan to come talk with us. Matt McNeil back on the show. Matt is the host of the Matt McNeil Show on AM 950 KTNF there in Minneapolis, St. Paul, one of our fabulous affiliates. Matt, thanks for taking time for us.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be on your show. Thank you.
So I got to tell you, I love the tweet. I love the energy. I love the optimism. Yes, great things happened. But sadly, we're a society that goes, Matt, what'd you do? That was yesterday. You got all that great stuff done yesterday. What'd you do for me lately?
I look at it. The Democrats generally have a problem. Well, okay, they sometimes can go have the easy layup for 2 points. Somehow they'll miss the backboard, give a guy in the stands a concussion, and break their own damn leg. And you're just like, how did you do that? It comes down to really just a few things. First of all, and we saw this in 2000, we saw this in 2016, Democrats have a really bad habit of ignoring the 90 to 95% of things that we agree on.
Yep.
And focusing on the 5 to 10% of things we don't agree on, and act like, you didn't give me a puppy 5 days into your term. I'll never trust you again. And you're like, oh my God, really? Really? Seriously? I understand it. Sometimes you get really passionate about a certain thing. I got things that I'm passionate about that Joe Biden hasn't done, or my local Minnesota, Democrats, the DFLers here have not done. But the reality is I still agree with them 90 to 95% of the time. I'm good.
Yep.
I'm good. The other thing is the Republicans try really, really hard, especially in years they're weak, to get Democrats to basically believe the narrative they want them to believe. And when I saw the AOC editorial this morning, I just sort of like, for God's sakes, if you're not going to fight, then quit, get out of the way, and we'll find someone who wants to win, that understands what Joe Biden has done, and will march to victory. Because the Republicans, at least the Republicans in Minnesota, they're imploding. They are absolutely imploding. You got the far-right loon balls. You got these, traditional Republicans who are trying to stay pro-Trump, and they hate each other, and it's just delicious, by the way, FYI, just loving that. But at the same time, I realize I'm not going to buy their narrative, because the only way the Republicans can really win is if the Democrats do not show up. So when I see these articles about we're doomed, well, shut up. No, we're not doomed. And as I said in the tweet there, Joe Biden, in 14 months, he took over a raging pandemic was going on. He got that somewhat under control, although we're still that's not over yet. But he's done a great job with that. That infrastructure bill, every single district in the country has got some improvements coming their way thanks to Joe Biden. And jobs, that's good union jobs right there across the board.
Yep.
Across the board. NATO, and granted, it's a tragedy what's happened in Ukraine with the evil Russians coming in there. But Joe Biden and his experience on international affairs has brought NATO back unified, something that Trump could have never done. And, the economy, you're right. There are some issues, gas prices, inflation. But the reality is it's stuff that a lot of things that are not necessarily Joe Biden's fault, but he's dealing with it. And yes, we can acknowledge that. We can acknowledge a war is there. We can acknowledge private companies set their prices individually. We do not live in a state where the government sets the prices of food and clothing and stuff. This is private business. But the reality is, in Minnesota, at least, where I'm at, the wages have increased 7%, while inflation's only at 5%. So we're still actually doing better. Doesn't mean it's not going to be, it's going to be an easy fight. You got to fight. You got to fight hard every single day. But for God's sake, stop shooting yourself in the foot and taking time to reload.
Yeah.
Ugh.
No, I mean, Democrats have always needed better messaging. And they've always needed to get out there. And I said this last night. I've said it a couple of times. When there's a fight to be had, Democrats will offer to hold your coat. That's about the best you're going to get out of most of them. And I want people who are going to ball up the digits and get in there and throw a couple of punches. Yeah. And we're in this moment because look, Republicans, and you're right. They spin a narrative and they hold on to it like a dog to a chew toy. And this narrative right now is, Joe Biden's weak and ineffective, and then Democrats can't do anything. And look, we got Joe Manchin, and Joe Manchin has been our albatross that we've got to deal with. And the solution to this, and Joe Manchin gave us the solution: go out and elect more Democratic senators. And the hope is that Pennsylvania and Ohio and Missouri and other places, maybe we get a couple more.
No, I think it's very viable. Of course, Minnesota, I got 2. I got Tina Smith. I got Amy Klobuchar. We're good there. We got the psychopathic nitwick over in Wisconsin. I think we're going to send a bunch of Minnesotans over there to try to help in that race. I think you mentioned messaging. Okay, we have the infrastructure bill. I'll go to the Minnesota 8th District, which is currently held by Pete Stauber. And he's one of those Republicans that likes to pretend he's labor, but he's not labor. He voted against that infrastructure bill. That's a lot of jobs and a lot of projects on the table. We've got Jennifer Schultz is going to be, she's a House rep here in Minnesota. She's going to run for Minnesota 8. And I looked at her and I said, here's what you do. Every single infrastructure project that happens in that Minnesota 8 district, get out there with local media saying, on the day with the shovel, you start digging out saying, thanks, Joe Biden. Thanks, Democrats. We got this done. And Pete Stauber voted against this. If you want more of this, vote for me. Get more Democrats in. We'll get more projects, more roads fixed, more bridges fixed, more airports fixed. Get me in the office and I'll do it. You get the local media. And you and I both know, you go out into rural America, that media generally runs pretty red. But the reality is they can't argue that fact. And of course, people when politics, all politics is local. And so it's a bread and butter issue. We're getting the airport fixed. We're getting the road fixed. We're getting the bridge fixed. Everyone's happy. And you basically control the media narrative. And a guy like Stauber, who voted against that bill, but has frantically been trying to take credit for it, all of a sudden is going, hamana, spinning in his wheels. And then you get the union guys lined up against him, because the reality is that Minnesotans, if you're labor, you are voting DFL. You're voting Democrat, because that's just that. There's no mixing words. You can win the messaging game. It just is, and it's not really difficult. It's just you got to do it.
Yep.
And that's the part that gets frustrating sometimes with the Democrats.
No, you're so spot on. And look, I wish the rest of the country had the kind of setup you've got there in Minnesota with the Democrat Farm Labor Party and people being as dedicated to the labor issue as you are there. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Matt McNeil. Matt is the host of the Matt McNeil Show on AM 950 KTNF there in Minneapolis, St. Paul, one of our radio affiliates, and we love our folks there in Minneapolis. You mentioned a moment ago how the Republicans keep throwing these loon balls out there and how just extreme they've gotten, and some of the fun that I've gotten to see, especially in a place like Ohio. I've been the debates. But interestingly enough, Politico reported today that a number of Republican candidates, they're now ducking the debates, and that the debates may be a thing of the past on the Republican side, because they are so crazy that they can't stand up to these debates because, one, they're factually challenged. 2, they don't know how to have actual conversations. And 3, well, they're lunatics. Anything that comes out of their mouth is like insanity salad. So you don't want those sound bites. This is bad stuff for you and me, because we live on that.
Oh, I love watching fools, walk into the rakes in the yard. That's just quality entertainment. It is funny because they can't defend themselves. I mean, let's face it. What are these people? Who are these far right loons that are upsetting even moderate Republicans and starting to win these convention endorsements? They are anti-vax, they're anti-mask, they are they just hate Joe Biden, they're pro-Russia. They've got this lunatic fringe. They think Trump won, and what's happening is they're finally starting to venture outside their bubble, and they're realizing, oh wait, I'm really on the minority here. I am not. I mean, I've encapsulated myself in my online Fox News, OAN, far right social media world. But now I've got to actually go out into the real world to compete. And I can't defend these things because they're going to ask me, are you an idiot? And I say, I guess I am. And that's it. So you're exactly right. They have to run terrified of the debates because, God forbid, they get held accountable. It's going to be fascinating in Minnesota because the governor's race, the candidate for the Republicans has been very anti-mask and anti-vax. And he's a doctor, Scott Jensen. He's a doctor. And he's like this. And he's got former Minnesota Viking player Matt Burke as his running mate. And they're both just far-right loonballs. And it's going to be very interesting for them. Whoever said I was against vaccines, I just think people should have had a choice. Well, then let's play the tape.
Yeah.
I got 5 hours of this. You ready to go? Grab some popcorn.
You as a football player know what instant replay was? Remember that? Remember instant replay? Or did you get hit in the head too many times? I should not make hit in the head jokes. Someone might slap me.
Well, hey, you might be asked to leave, but you can stay if you apparently decide you want to. I guess that's the rule too on that. No, in Minnesota, and I don't know if it's like this where you're at and where everyone else is at, but okay, so in the metro area, the Twin Cities metro area, which is really starting to become the guidepost for the entire the state. I mean, there are so many metro districts. It's basically half the control of the House, half the control of the Senate, right there. In districts where it is definitely getting more Democrat. I mean, as the Democrat, as the influence of the city grows outwards, and they just got done with redistricting. In districts which are Democratic districts, which actually have popular moderate Republicans there, the far right loon Republicans have won the endorsements. And I'm like, yeah, you guys don't see the forest for the trees, do you? And they're setting themselves up for a real rude awakening here in Minnesota. But what we have to do is get back to the first thing we said, is that you can't have that loser mentality.
Yeah.
Get behind me. I'll fight. I'll throw the first punch. You got to get out there and fight every single day, as you need to do on every single election.
Yeah. Now, last night we had Tom Nelson from Wisconsin on the program, talking about his race over there in Wisconsin for Senate against Ron Johnson. And I like Tom Nelson, a good guy. I think he'll put up a good fight. We need more people like that. We need more people who are going to come out and be unapologetically pro-working class. Say, look, we're going to fight for working families. We're going to make lives better. I mean, that's the Democratic message. There's two things. Do you believe in democracy or don't you? And we're going to make lives better. That, to me, that's the message.
Governor Walsh, of course, he was Minnesota's first Democratic representative for many years. And, this is a red district, and he would keep winning it. And I asked him one time, and this is, okay, you don't have to become Republican light. That also torques me. I get very upset about that. You don't have to become a moderate Republican and try to sound like you're going to, work with the other side. Walsh came on my show, and we talked about a food stamps program. And he said, here's the deal about food stamps. It's real simple. I got farmers with crops in the field ready to go feed hungry people. They get paid. Hungry people get food. It's a win-win. Why is this not a good idea? And it was such a great way to look at, I think a lot of Democrats look at, obviously if someone's hungry, get them some food, for goodness sakes, let's feed the hungry. But then to look at it and say, not only that, but I got farmers with product ready to go. They get paid. The farmers, the labor, their margins are so tight as it is. This gives them a leg up. I think that you have to look at it is you don't have to become Republican light. You can find, if the Democrats have a good platform, like I said, infrastructure, the fighting of the pandemic, healthcare. How many families are out there right now with crippling medical debt right now, hanging over their heads after 2 years of coronavirus? You have a message, you can hone it. Stop acting like you have to be something other than you are. If you're not a proud Democrat, then get out of the way, let a proud Democrat run, because you can win with the Democratic message.
There you go. To your point on the farm thing, the reason that food stamps are in the farm bill is because they do go hand in hand. And to your Republican light point, one of my favorite quotes from a good socialist president, Dwight David Eisenhower, He had written a letter to his brother Edgar and said anyone who would come out against the Farm Bill, unemployment insurance, Social Security, labor laws, they'd never be heard from in our political history. There are a few Texas oil millionaires, Howard Hunt, a couple of those, but their numbers are negligible and they are stupid. The sad reality is stupid has taken over the Republican Party because they want to do away with all that stuff. Look at Rick Scott's 11-point plan. Wants to do away with Social Security. And there are seniors who want to vote for the plan because they're too stupid to read the plan.
There are way too many Republican voters could walk into their house, find Rick Scott sleeping with their spouse, and the first words out of their mouth will be damn Democrats. They just do not know how to get out of their own damn way.
There you go. Last bit I got for you. Madison Cawthorn, I got to get your thoughts on Kevin McCarthy and the stern talking to about orgies and cocaine and, well, the exaggeration. Thoughts on the exaggeration?
My first guess is the real question they were asking is, where was this at again? And so I'm sorry. Tell us exactly who was behind this. What location was this at? We'll go investigate ourselves. First of all, I think that fool from North Carolina I think he's making it up as he goes. I'm not saying that there aren't some bad actors within the Republican Party, but come on, man. Yep. You're saying Chuck Grassley? What? It's Susan Collins? What are you talking about here? Oh. Dear Lord. Oh, I'm sorry. I hope your dinner has digested, folks. Anyway, but you look at this. I think, what you've got is, you said it, kind of touching on what you said earlier. It's that far right lunatic fringe, and they are the child that's had 16 candy bars, and they're trying to go everywhere and run everywhere. They don't realize there are rules for what they can do. And so, Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene and all of them, this is going to have to be something they're pushing and pushing and pushing to see how far they can take this. And the reality is the Republicans, when the minute that Cheney and Rove welcomed these clowns into the party in 2004 to make up for the blue collar Democrats that voted for Bush the first time around, but left him after that this is the biggest mistake, because the second they did, they were never going to leave. They're always going to want a seat at that table. Yeah, the genie is out of the bottle. And 63 of them voted against statues for Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. What used to be known as a yawn vote got 63 Republicans to vote against it. Mind-blowing. Part of the problem when you create districts where a turnip with an R next to its name could win. And that's part of their problem. And speaking of Louis Gohmert, yeah. I mean, it's you have these districts where it is so impossible to dig that tick out that it literally becomes who can be the most psychopathic far right person. Ta-da! Well, nice job. Your redistricting has actually backfired on you. There you go. And now it's a beauty pageant to see who's craziest. Yes. And there it is. Matt, I appreciate the time. As always, great stuff. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again real soon, man. Absolutely. My absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Fabulous stuff. Great talking with you, Matt McNeil. Make sure you check out his show, The Matt McNeil Show, there on AM 950 KTNF in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Let's take a quick break. Right back with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Some really
really great news. Good news for the workers at Kellogg's. The Cheez-Its plant. Yes, Kellogg's owns Cheez-Its. And who didn't know Cheez-Its was made by union workers? Good. I'm glad no one didn't know that. I'm glad everyone knew there was a union-made product, and it is on your snack list. But they got an incredible new contract, 15% wage increase over the next 3 years. They got increases in their health care, retirement. They got all kinds of great stuff in this contract, and this is what the wave of strikes and actions that have been going on with the BCDGM and those folks and the RSWDU and all of the organizing that's been going on. Workers have finally said enough is enough. And, I think employers are starting to listen and realize, hey, I think they're serious. Not to mention, last year you had what 47 million people quit their job to look for other jobs. But I want a quick shout out to the Cheez-Its workers. Good on you. Congratulations on the big victory. Very, very important. I think that great stuff. Finally, TurboTax. Let's talk bait and switch for a bit. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, they are suing TurboTax creator Intuit for allegedly deceiving consumers. Because you've seen the ads on TV, haven't you? Or not recently, because they're now off. But for the last couple of weeks, there were ads on that said, hey, you could file your income taxes for free online with us, free tax preparation, only to find out that, well, it's not free for everyone, only certain circumstances. Like my son who has, one employer who has no deductions, nothing. It's the simplest of forms, and it shouldn't even be a form. It should be like a postcard. With you made this much, you paid this much, this is how much we have to pay you back. That should be it. Barely just his name and his social security number should be it. That, I think that's still free, but everything else, not so much. And the FTC dubbed the ads as bogus and have filed to have them discontinue them. Because look, people, here in the last days are rushing to get to April 15th. Because you've got to pay the taxes. And I know my accountant is working feverishly because I like to get mine done by April 15th. He always likes to go, no, let's have an extension. You're going to pay anyway, and you're going to pay through the nose. Why not? I go, no, I got to get it done. I want to be done by the 15th. That's one of those things that I don't want to drag it out for the year and have it hanging over my head. Get it done. But I can't imagine, if I went to, TurboTax and going, hey, I'm going to get free tax. And then I find out, oh, no, I've uploaded all of my stuff. I've done all of this work. And they go, oh, gee, we're so sorry. You're not eligible for the free one. And think about it. Think about it from your own perspective. If you went through all of the work to fill in all your information and upload all of the forms and all of the W-2s and all of this stuff, and then it said, oh, by the way, it's going to cost you $9.99. Would you pay the $9.99 not to have to go through that again? They're betting you will. Their studies have probably shown, a good percentage of people going to do it. It's only $9. I got ripped off, but I'll eat it. Well, good on the Federal Trade Commission. And this, again, another one of those deregulation things. Without them, consumers are going to get fleeced. So good on them. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though. Has anyone gone to TurboTax? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Let me know how that worked out for you. If you've missed any of today's program, and I'm sure you have not, but if you have, we have this fabulous podcast where you can make sure you never miss a minute. Take the program wherever you go. Always right there, always available. Wherever you get your podcasts, from iTunes to iHeart, Podbean to Stitcher, and everywhere in between, wherever you get them, we have it available. Download the Rick Smith Show podcast wherever you get yours. Also, let me know what you think. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.